simple stuff like a bucket in the ground, photographs in a report versus borehole logs, absolutely crucial when it comes to waste management.
Welcome to the Ground Investigation Podcast, a show featuring interviews and insights from leaders in the geotechnical and geo-environmental business world. Join host Michael Taylor as he discusses the ups and downs of running a business in the GI industry, getting geological experts to share their learnings and lessons, as well as their plans for the future, highlighting what they think will improve the ground investigation industry moving forward. Now, here is your host, Michael Taylor.
Today, we're joined by a seasonal expert in construction waste and founder of Soilex. With over 14 years of experience in projects like Battersea Power Station under his belt, Alex knows how to handle waste. We'll talk about his career, get some advice for the industry, and maybe find out why companies should call Soilex before the competition. So without further ado, let's welcome on Alex. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
Good. I just want to give yourself a little bit more of an introduction, really, and kind of also tell us a little bit about how you kind of, got to the position where you are and what sparked your interest to get into the waste management industry.
Yep. Okay. So I'm MD and founder of Soilex, and we've been doing that about 5 years. But before that, about 15-ish years at GRS, who are a national aggregate and waste broker. And I stumbled into that, really. So my first job when I left school at 16, my first job was working in golf shops because I was an aspiring golf pro, albeit an unsuccessful one. Knew somebody that worked at GRS, got asked to join, and it was essentially as a kind of internal sales coordinator, and I spent 15 years there. The back kind of half of that period, I started to look after what they called their Source Solutions division. And I think it was just because I was always the person that took the most interest. They would obviously get lots and lots of waste inquiries. I think they moved 6 million tonnes of waste every single year. So we're seeing site investigations and inquiries coming over time. And it's probably one of the only ones that actually opened them and read them and took an interest and started to try and learn what classification meant and what the data meant and what the legislation was. And when they needed someone to try to drive that division forward, they lumbered it on me, and I'm pleased that they did, because that 8 years was a real good learning experience working with some of the biggest companies on some of the biggest projects in the country. And I think the learning that I got within that business really inspired me as to why I should start Soilex.
Yeah, I think it always helps to have the kind of the grounding of being in a company, seeing how everything works, and then going off to start your own company. Some people kind of just started, but you don't have the backing on which you probably would have had an experience.
Absolutely
as well.
agree.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's taken Soilex some time to get their foot through the door, some very, very big clients. But when you're working for a 200, 300, 400 million pound business, naturally you're through the door by default of being there, and you get exposed to a lot more, a lot quicker. So that definitely helped.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So what qualifications or skills are essential for someone looking to pursue a career in waste management, particularly in the construction and geo-environmental sectors?
Well, it's a good question, because essentially none, which is probably one of my biggest frustrations, is there aren't relevant qualifications really to say I can do waste management in construction. I'm a chartered waste manager, but I could do it without being a chartered waste manager. So in terms of qualifications, I think that's something that I wish there was, because I think it's lacking, which means essentially anybody can come and say that they can do it.
Yeah.
But in terms of skills, I mean, the obvious thing is competence, is understanding the regulations, the legislation, how to actually classify waste and what you can and what you can't do. But I think the biggest skill, or I think the reason why we've had some success, is that we can take that and then we can convey it in plain, simple English. I think that what helps is the background where we've come from as a business is everybody in our business that is technical has come essentially from a waste management background rather than a consultancy background.
Okay.
So we know how to operate on site. We know how to move a load of muck. And it's so important to know that when you're doing the front end stuff of consultancy and testing, because ultimately you're doing it to get to a point where you can move the waste, rather than what we see a lot of the time is people doing work at the front end that actually hinders you or doesn't really help you down the line when you need to actually get the job done.
Okay.
So the skill set for us, I think, is understanding it, but conveying it in a way that is simple, because ultimately the most important people are the people that are digging it out and moving it on site. And these aren't people that are experts in waste management. They're experts as ground workers, demolition companies, main contractors, utility firms, whatever. So they need plain and simple advice. Here's what you do. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do.
And I think one of the questions a bit later on is about because you engaged with a marketing agency, didn't you, to kind of help convey a simple message and create some really good, funny films or clips for LinkedIn, etc. But I mean, that kind of makes you stand out straight away, because there's not many companies who kind of engage in a proper marketing company and do something that stands out. It's generally just a repost, maybe a good review, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, that must help.
I mean, yes, that, and LinkedIn in general is a huge generator of work for us. And again, it goes back to the fact that a lot of them, we're not doing sales pitches on there. What we're doing is we're talking about the industry, our experiences in it, what's good, what's bad, educational stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, frankly speaking, there's a reason for that, and it is business development. But it's also, I think there is a lack of places to go, considering construction and demolition waste is the largest producer of waste in the country. I feel there's a lack of places to go to get some simple, practical, good advice, which is part of the reason why I started Soilex in the first place. Was I was working at a waste broker, but all they did was essentially broker waste. Well, actually, you need a bit of advice and you need some testing. And if you can offer all of those services all in one place, from telling you what you can do, what you can't do, to testing it, to moving it, it's a nice service to provide.
Yeah.
And so the marketing piece, I mean, again, I think our industry is relatively antiquated in terms of marketing and promotional. So it's relatively easy to stand out. And I think because we've got quite a nice message, we do stand out. And I get I think a lot of people feel like they know me because I rant on LinkedIn quite a lot. And because Soilex is very good on socials as well. People do feel like they know you before they know you, which is, again, great. It's really, really good.
It does help because it makes conversations easier. If you speak to someone and go, "Oh, you're Alex from, I seen your post the other day," that kind of stirs something to me.
Yeah, the amount of times people, I mean, almost on a weekly basis, I did a video in lockdown about the analogy of a whack test using a tea bag. And it was when it was on my old house, and it was on the countertop, and must have been, we only started Soilex 6 months or a year. So I started it just before COVID, which was absolutely ideal for your mental health. But
definitely.
I still get that mentioned to me though almost weekly, whether it be via LinkedIn message or I meet someone, and some guy I know in the industry sent us a load of Yorkshire tea bags the other week just because we mentioned the tea bag analogies. I think it's it does mean that we can stand out in the industry, and it's good for business.
Things like that. So kind of creative, homemade marketing, essentially, or kind of you were going over something which kind of does stand out as some marketing. People seem to like that. Once it's overly formal, kind of like steel and glass corporate, it's pretty hard to get someone to identify with something like that.
It is, yeah.
And
I think especially if everything that you post is a sales pitch. We do this, we do this, we do this. It's not offering value.
Yeah.
But if we can post about my post this morning, what you should, here's some considerations if you find asbestos on your site. Is we're not there providing, that's not an overarching list of absolutely everything you should do, but it's just giving people a bit of a thought process around what they should do. There's a little bit of a guide, because some people might not be thinking of that, or some people might be over-egging it and costing themselves time and money when they don't need to. But just by putting some stuff out there like that, it does, we are genuinely trying to help as well. That if they come and use Soilex or they don't use Soilex, fine, whatever they want to do. But we want to try and just create some value. It's not just all about sales pitch the whole time.
Yeah, no, it's a quick way to turn people off. I read somewhere it's every kind of 6 or 7. So it's kind of advice and things like that. And then every 6 or 7 is kind of the more marketing pitch, really.
Yeah.
And it depends how you do it, doesn't it? If you're writing some things yourself, it's kind of hooking people in with something that's interesting and engaging, which is an art in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can have a great business, but getting that message across, which you guys are doing well, is definitely a hard thing.
Yeah, well, I think we have a lot of frustrations, and I'm sure we'll come on to it. We have a lot of frustrations with stuff we see in site investigations. So we have a rant in the office almost on a daily basis. So I just have a little notebook on my phone that says, "Oh, there's another great post idea."
Yeah,
and note them down and then just rant on LinkedIn most mornings.
That's the best. Those ones that come to you maybe in the shower, taking a dog for a walk, and you kind of pen down on your mobile phone.
Yeah.
Because when you try too hard, sometimes you just pull out nonsense.
Well, there's a little tip for anyone that does want to post on LinkedIn is I got given, which is create a WhatsApp group called LinkedIn Ideas. You have to create it with someone, but then you pin it, and then you immediately delete the other person out of it, which means that will always stay at the top of your WhatsApp feed. And every single time you get an idea, you send a message to the group, which is essentially sending a message to yourself.
Yeah.
And then when you need to go and write some content, you've got your ideas, because you'll have an idea. I mean, I have ideas all the time, but then you'll forget them because life.
Yeah.
So there's a little tip if you're trying to get into LinkedIn and you have lots of ideas you keep forgetting, is create the pinned WhatsApp group.
That's a very good idea, because I kind of I'll write it in a book, then I'll leave my book somewhere, or I'll take one of the pages out which had the best idea ever, which I've never actually got to do anything with. You need to stop it from disappearing, because we have lots of ideas throughout the day. If you don't write it down, it's gone.
Yeah.
Don't use paper. Invention, but it's gone anyway. How has your role in the industry evolved over the years, from working for the GRS group to starting your own company, Soilex?
So I think at GRS, I was very much behind the scenes, because my role became a compliance technical role. I would be essentially support to the commercial teams, and their commercial teams were national, and they were dozens and dozens of people. So they essentially would roll me out when they needed to talk technical to a client or have a complex project or whatever it might be. And then when you become you manage your own business, you need to win the work, facilitate the work, and everything else that goes in between, including running the business. So my role has very much become technical and commercial within Soilex, and marketing and administration and everything. But we're at a point now, as we're growing, that we've got more infrastructure in the business. So my role mainly focuses on developing the business and looking after key clients and business development, as well as infrastructure within the business. And I think I'm much more visible externally than I used to be. Again, like I say, I used to be behind the scenes, but now one of my aims really is to, we have a lot of frustrations with the industry and how often waste is managed poorly. And the only way I think that you can change that is by being a voice in the industry. So one of my key things is to become that person of influence.
That is a good thing. That's kind of what I'm trying to do, essentially. There's a book by Daniel Priestley called The Key Person of Influence.
He's on my bedside table.
Yeah, he's good, and he's got a few other ones. He was actually agreed to come on a podcast because he has some new kind of software out. Haven't got around to doing it, but that could be interesting. So you mentioned about kind of getting a process in place, growing it from yourself to what size are you now? How many people is it?
We're 12 or 13. We've got a new person starting next week. So 13.
So 12 or 13 then. So how did you, on a practical way, how did you get the processes put in the business, essentially? What was the process of doing that?
Well, that is still one of our big challenges, and I would say we're not there. So I think a few key things that we are working on. I think my learnings are, number one, know your strengths and know your weaknesses, and processes and systems actually aren't my strength. One thing we've done as we've grown the business is we've profiled our team. It's one of those ones you answer 20 questions and you figure out where people's brain works. And I think the most value I got out of that was understanding what I'm really good at, and then why I am a massive challenge to some of our team members because of essentially the way my brain works. Okay. So you've got to put the right people in the right places. So I have a lot of really, really good ideas, and follow through tends to be pretty poor. Whereas we've got some people in the business who are fantastic at the implementation of stuff, but possibly not ideas people. So you figure out who they are and you use them. So, I mean, our operations manager now started as a part-time admin person 2.5 years ago.
Really?
He's an absolute superstar. Couldn't survive without. Rather than go external and say, right, let's go and get a COO or an operations director, let's harness the skills we've got in the business. And let's provide opportunity for people. And that's one of the things I've loved about growing a business, is providing opportunities for people. So we're right on in the midst of that journey of backfilling her time, implementing systems, processes. We've developed a digital portal, which we're about to launch in January, which will mean that we'll have a much more consistent way of working internally, but also delivering work to clients as well. And it's what I've learned is that's absolutely crucial. But we've essentially doubled in size in terms of people in the last 12 months. And so when it's 5 or 6 people, it's quite easy because everyone knows what's going on. And suddenly it becomes 12 people, and we'll be we're opening another second office next month. And that is when you need the systems and processes, because you can't be across everything and you can't know everything that's going on. But if you can provide a template of how to work. Funnily enough, I've actually engaged with a lady who used to work at McDonald's, and she used to do systems, be head of systems and processes at McDonald's for the UK.
One of the perfect people to get, because they're famous for their systems and processes.
Because they're famous for their systems and processes. And she said if someone came in on day one and started cooking the chips in a different way, fries, then you wouldn't need a manager to tell that person that they're not cooking the fries in the right way. It would just be the other person cooking the fries that says, that's not how we do it. We do it this way. And it won't be quite as simple as that, I think, because we don't just cook chips and we don't just cook a burger. We do lots and lots of different things. But I guess the mentality is the same of, this is the Soilex way. This is the way we do things. We always deliver in this way. We always try and maintain the quality. And that's my biggest fear as we grow, is we've always been massive on quality. Yeah. And the busier we get and the quicker we grow, the fear is the quality can drop. Or the people that are overseeing the quality can't always be across everything. So those system processes are absolutely key for us to make sure we're still delivering good work for our clients.
And I love how you have someone from McDonald's to help with systems and processes. They are kind of who would think of with kind of systems and processes in place. I'd love to get their employee kind of handbook with all the how to do things.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, have you ever seen the film The Founder?
Yeah, seen it
where that was it from those 2 guys that started the first McDonald's, which was so every stick of ketchup was out of a gun that amount of ketchup and 3 pieces of gherkin or pickle, what they call it, and it's just like that was it.
So well thought out, isn't it? And they kind of they chalked it out, didn't they, in a kind of a playground area, and gone over it and went, that doesn't work, we redo it, scrub that out, and start again, and they made something brilliant. But then again, I suppose the person who took it from what they were, which was it was a really good idea, to the McDonald's we know, was Ray Kroc, wasn't it? So he took it from the pretty good business to, it's amazing. It's stats and how many burgers have sold over the
unbelievable
lives.
He was an absolute rascal and he really screwed him over. But I think the point is, the reason why he could expand it so quickly, just roll one out after the other, was it was just rinse and repeat. Do the same thing every single time. And it doesn't quite work that way in our world, because every time a bucket goes in the ground, they find something different, or every client's need is slightly different. So you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. And we wouldn't want to have a one-size-fits-all approach. But what you can ensure, I think, is that quality of delivery is always the same. Speed of turnaround is always the same. Customer experience is always the same. The bit that goes on between that comes down to area of expertise, and we want a bit of human interaction in the way that we work. We've got a brilliant team and some really brilliant people that all have their own ways of working and their own skill sets, and that's great because it gives you different perspectives. And I think one of the best things I did was employ someone into our team. First person I employed to support me technically, I actually took from my previous company who had been trained by me. So essentially, to some degree, that becomes an echo chamber because they only know what you've told them, and they've gone out and they learn their own stuff now, and as well as hearing from me. So they've got a much more rounded view on things. The other person comes in from a different business and they question everything, and it's brilliant because you need to be questioned, because if you always do
Yeah.
something one way
Mhm.
and no one ever says, well, have you thought about it this way? And you know what it's like with, especially with waste regulations, it's written in black and white, but it's down to interpretation. And we have weekly conversations around our interpretation of that. How would you apply it to this project? Should we or shouldn't we do that? And that's great. It means that we're constantly thinking, constantly challenging each other. It's not just me saying we do it this way. It's people with different views, different opinions. So that's why it's great having those people.
That would certainly help rather than kind of a dictatorship, getting other people's point of view, because it could be someone who's only a few weeks into a new job with yourselves. It just comes out with something, which is a fantastic idea. So what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen in waste management or the geo-environmental sectors over the past decade?
For us, and I'll focus predominantly on waste management because it's obviously what we do, but for us, I think it's competence and it's understanding and in its delivery of information to the people that are important to get their information to. We see so many site investigations that give either completely incorrect or pretty poor advice, or don't make it clear the purpose of an investigation. Typically a phase 2 investigation is going to be done sometimes before a site is even purchased. It's a light touch. There's budget limitations. There could be access limitations, lots of different things. But these documents are then rolled out down the chain through a whole tender process, and suddenly they end up coming across to the waste management company's desk and say, please price me for dealing with our waste. So that investigation was never designed for that. Or there might have been a basic prelim waste assessment within there, but it's, full of tests and they're moving 10,000 cube of waste. And I think it's often, we see proposals all the time and we sense check proposals for clients. And even it's just sometimes it's language. It's like we will assess for contamination. Well, is that contamination from a human health risk perspective, or is that contamination from a waste management perspective? Because they're two very, very different things. But to the layman, contamination is contamination. If your site is contaminated, you've got hazardous waste. If it's uncontaminated, you've got inert muck, and it's really cheap to get rid of.
Yeah.
And I think that message doesn't ever get through. And I think it needs to be made much clearer at the outset, especially when someone is securing a site investigation as to what they're getting and the real purpose of it, and qualifying what those terms mean and what does contamination mean. And ultimately, if a proposal is a dozen pages long and a layman is reading it, they're not going to understand it.
Yeah.
They're not going to understand, is this going to help me move my mark? Or understand what my risks are, what are the limitations going to be? And this is why there's always so many surprises down the line when it comes to people securing contracts or being asked to take risks or actually then trying to move the waste. It's almost driving non-conformance a lot of the time. I don't think that certainly isn't on purpose, but I think it's a communication thing and a language thing around telling people what they're getting and making sure they know the limitations of it from a waste perspective.
In terms of, you mentioned about the inert waste being nice and cheap, and the hazardous waste is going to be more expensive. When I've worked on one role before where the contractors were very keen for all the hazardous waste to be kind of shipped out as inert waste, all kind of mixing just to save them money. Do you ever came across anything like that, and how did you deal with it?
Finding the right staff is hard, really hard. At GI Rec Limited, we understand the ground investigation market inside out and can make all the difference to your recruitment woes. You need to concentrate on running the business, which is very difficult to do without the correct number of qualified staff. We can help you get your time back and lower your stress levels. We only work with talented, referenced, and often entirely exclusive candidates across the ground engineering sector. Wouldn't that be nice? It's not a dream, it's a reality for many of our happy customers. Get in touch with the team now to book a call. Just email info@girec.co.uk to book a call, or click the link in the show notes now.
Only on a weekly basis. I think, this sometimes goes down to how the industry is awarding contracts. And we work with a lot of ground workers and we work with a lot of main contractors, and people always want to pass on the risk.
Yeah.
I've sat and done lunch and learns with main contractors that say, oh yeah, we pass the risk to a ground worker. Now, you haven't got to be, a CFO to know that margins in construction are tight, very, very tight, and that, even a £100 million ground worker might do well to make 1% some of the time.
Yeah.
So if you're passing on risk to that ground worker who finds £1 million problem in the ground, what behaviour does that drive? People, if they have a problem that could financially really hinder their business, they've got a decision to make.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things are what then drive the behaviour of how the waste is managed. And it goes back to the investigation, is that lack of understanding throughout the chain as to the limitations of the information in an investigation, or the lack of good advice from somebody when they're helping the waste producer price the waste. Yes, thanks for sending across the information. Yes, your price would be X, but by the way, all you've done is 8 window samples and half the site is not tested, and you've not tested the asphalt for coal tar, and all of these things that weren't thought about that suddenly then become a surprise when the project actually starts or the contract is awarded. So, yes, we see it on a very, very regular basis that people are very, I guess, to be fair, very rarely do we see it as callously as saying, oh, we know this is hazardous, move it as inert anyway. And I think that those days are certainly numbered and are certainly less. But we definitely see a lot of non-conformance in terms of how waste is managed. And I think what people think inert really is. And waste going to places that ultimately it shouldn't. So yeah, that's one of our frustrations and challenges, because it makes, sometimes our knowledge makes us uncompetitive. In a muck shifting back world or a waste removal world, we know what you can do, we know what you can't do, and therefore by definition we become a problem for people. So hence why we tend to work with people that want to be compliant rather than not.
Well, definitely. So what can ground investigation companies do to improve waste classification on site?
Good question.
If you are enjoying this podcast, please subscribe now.
I would say firstly, only do it if you're good at it. If you haven't got that in-house expertise, we aren't geotechnical people. Yeah, we quite often get asked, can you, we need to do a site investigation, we need to classify waste, but also could you do this, that, or the other? And we'll say we don't do that. Or we'll say that we have a partner, we can partner with them, they can do that element of it, we can do that, and we put a package together. But I think what's interesting is the ramifications of getting geotechnical wrong often can be vastly worse and certainly more noticeable than getting waste classification wrong. So if you get geotechnical wrong and someone designs a building around it and that building subsides, falls down, doesn't work, that's a clear and present danger for that business in terms of their liabilities. But if you're good at that element of it and say, oh, we can tag on a little bit of waste classification onto our report, and that is ultimately done poorly or done wrong, you don't see comeback on that. Because typically what happens is that gets picked up down the chain of the waste management companies or the tips or whatever it might be, saying, well, hang on a second, this is the real classification of it. So I looked at a project recently for a house builder that had engaged a geotechnical company to do a site investigation, and there was a section in it that was on waste classification. And essentially, what they said was there is no exceedances against the human health criteria for an industrial setting, so therefore the waste is non-hazardous. So there was no mention of WM3, no actual WM3 classification done. And when you actually looked at the results, it was like 80% hazardous. So the house builders stand there going, well, we've priced this job, awarded contracts on the back of thinking the waste is non-hazardous. But actually, suddenly you've got and the additional bill is substantial. It's hundreds of thousands of pounds to then manage the waste properly, if they do manage it properly, which is a surprise to them and a surprise to their ground worker, because if you've got a professional report that says the waste is all non-hazardous, then you think, okay, brilliant, we'll price that as non-hazardous because a professional has issued that report. So so to go back to the question, I think ensure you've got internal competence, or if nothing else, subcontract that competence into your business when you're asked to do it. and I think be very, very clear within the report and investigation about the limitations that might have. And someone might want a bit of an understanding about waste classification, but if you're only able to do a small amount of samples for a site that's going to generate a huge amount of waste, then make sure it's really, really clear that further investigation is going to be needed. And this is just a guide, but ultimately it can't be relied on for the whole project.
So how can ground investigation construction companies reduce their waste on projects, both in terms of materials and managing contaminated soils?
It's a question we get asked a lot, and obviously being in the industry and going through events, talking through with things like Claire Dalcott scheme. The biggest challenge, I think, is often much, much earlier in the chain around project design. By the time it gets to when we're working with clients, it's often far too late. The design is made and you're going to have to generate X amount of waste. But I think there's a few things. I mean, one, looking at the opportunity for direct transfer and the reuse of soils either on the site or on another site can be beneficial. We do a lot of MMP work with people, and we source receiver sites, we source donor sites, put them together, do all the compliance paperwork, MMPs and what have you, is one way. I think in terms of reducing contamination, I think that typically contamination is found during either a site investigation or some additional testing that might have been done, but most of the time that can be mitigated, it can be reduced, it can be managed better, and that might be through additional testing, it might be having a better segregation strategy, it might be through some on-site treatment and picking or whatever it might be. But it comes down to knowing what you can do and what you can't do, and then being able to factor that into program. And I think that I was on a site yesterday that uncovered a lot of asbestos in the ground. And suddenly the biggest concern becomes program, where they start thinking, well, actually, yes, we can reduce costs, but we've got a program to hit. And if we don't hit that program, that's going to be a concern. So we'll just lump it all away as contaminated. Well, actually, you might have some options there. So a better investigation, simply put, an investigation where you put a bucket in the ground from an excavator rather than a window sampler would have found that problem. I looked at a proposal this week for a major contractor trying to buy a piece of land, and they had the investigation had specified 8 window samples on a brownfield site that had some risk of contamination and some history that might have been shown that there might be contamination. I said, well, put an excavator in there. And there is challenges with that. It's more disruptive, and if you haven't bought the site yet, and I do appreciate that, it's always possible. However, simple stuff like a bucket in the ground, photographs in a report versus borehole logs, absolutely crucial when it comes to waste management. No, we actually had some training in-house from the guy that trains the Environment Agency on waste classification, and I was chatting to him about it, and he said often what a waste looks like, the physicality, is almost as important as the data. Because you're not just looking at what is its chemical composition, what is the classification, but it's then, okay, how can we manage it? Is it stony? Is it sandy? Could we recycle it? Could we screen it? Could it actually be stabilised and reused on site? Or could it not? And it's going to have to go into a hole in the ground, which is kind of worst case scenario. But you can't quite tell that from borehole logs, and every borehole log is sort of a lot of the time at the interpretation of a geo-environmental engineer, and one person's sandy clay is another one's clay sand, and is it going to wash? Isn't it going to wash? So when someone's looking at a site and saying, well, okay, well, waste isn't inert, but actually, well, it could easily go through a wash plant. You don't know that until you've seen it. So simple things like a bucket in the ground and some photographs are often absolutely crucial.
For companies in construction and ground investigations looking to manage their waste better, what should they prioritize when choosing a waste management partner?
I think it's competence. Again, I go back to competence. If you're working with, if you go back to, say, for instance, our type of clients when we're moving waste, is they're going out to what they would class as their MUCK shifters, who can shift our MUCK. And often, if you've got a greenfield site, no contamination risks, it's just essentially get that waste off the site, or get that off the site as quickly as you can, because we know it's not contaminated. Then it's ultimately price driven. And there's not a huge amount that needs to be done from a compliance perspective other than just making sure it goes to the right place. If you're on a brownfield site and it's contaminated and there's lots of different factors to consider in terms of how you're going to manage it and segregate it, then the world of muck shifters often is companies that run trucks. They don't. Yeah. These are companies that won't have people that can understand the site investigation, that can do a classification, that understand the legislation. They're going to send the report out to all of their tips, see what comes back and price it. Whereas, take for instance our business and some of our direct competitors, they're going to have that in-house competence to say, well, actually, before we send it out to the tips, we might want to take it. We can assess the information ourselves, and actually we can say, if you did X, you did Y, and you did Z, this is going to be the best way of managing your waste, and here are your options. So I think it's just figuring out what horse you need for the race. Yeah. Is it one that's just we need to get huge volumes out as quickly as possible for a greenfield site? That's great. And a large portion of the time that will be companies that run trucks. If it's more complex, and I think if you, especially even at tender stage, if you as a ground worker want to set yourself apart as someone who can help the main contractor to manage the site in a compliant way and promote some cost savings at the same time, then having a waste management company on board that has that competence that you can almost have in-house adds massive value to your bid and adds massive value to the main contractor, because essentially a lot of the time the main contractors want to subcontract that. They don't want to have that management and that expertise in their own businesses. They want their subcontractors to have it.
Where do you see the future of waste management and soil classification sort of in the next 5 or 10 years? And are there any emerging technology or methods that could transform the industry?
Well, I think there is a slow creep towards compliance. I'm interested to see what digital waste tracking will do for that. I don't know when it will actually be released. I've done some workshops with DEFRA around the digital waste tracking, and it's certainly not a compliance platform at the moment in terms of having to ensure that the waste you are moving is done compliantly. But ultimately what it's doing is creating a fingerprint to say, okay, this waste has moved from this place to the other, which will be hopefully a permitted site. But I think certainly in our world of construction and demolition waste, where huge volumes are moving, when those fingerprints are multiple, and if you're an enforcement officer that needs to go and investigate someone, you're going to go to the site that's created 1,000 fingerprints and not one, because it's going to be a big project with a big client who should be doing things right, and it's worth investigating. And I think that might drive some behaviours, because I think at the moment people aren't investigated and they aren't asked questions, and a lot of the time main contractors subcontract the waste and it's managed by their ground worker, and that they might not necessarily be putting all the checks and balances in place that they should. But I think the challenge in our industry is tech. I think that it's very antiquated in terms of that development. There are some brilliant things out there that do assist people, but it's I think if we can start to adopt AI into that, and we can start to create a platform where you don't necessarily have a waste expert that can tell you what you can and what you can't do, to understand what you can and what you can't do. Yeah. Because there's not that many of them around, but there's a lot of waste that moves. Yeah. And I think we've got to, as an industry, start creating some things that are easier to use, that can guide people in the right way, and that can promote compliance, it can promote sustainability, all that good stuff. It's a long way off. We're only just getting to a point where we can digitally track waste, and even that won't be released when they said it will be released, so it should be April. Just because I think things take time, and there's obviously budget restraints and probably people restraints in terms of building that out.
Are there any particularly recent changes in the waste and contamination space that environmental professionals should be aware of at the moment?
I think some of the biggest changes that I see coming up are going to be in the utilities and the highway sector. The utilities industry has been under the microscope for quite a few years now. Large part is because of the nature of the work they do makes classifying their waste extremely challenging. Okay. If you're an emergency works, but a lab test takes 5 days to come back, then how on earth do you classify the waste that you're excavating out of that hole in the ground where there's a water leak and you have to move it off site? Because you just, frankly, you don't know that you're going to be moving that until the problem arises. obviously the Environment Agency and Streetworks UK have been looking at that and looking at trying to develop how that's going to be managed. And I think the next focus will be on the highway sector to better manage their waste and to have some kind of processes in place to classify it more accurately. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. There's a couple of position statements in at the moment around the management of utility waste, but eventually, if and when they're withdrawn, that will be a huge challenge for that sector to make sure that they're doing things right.
So from managing the team at GRS Group to running your own company, what key lessons have you learned about leadership?
You may should ask my team and not me. I think the way that I lead at Soilex is again going back to understanding what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are.
Yeah.
And I think I'm also very, very honest with my team about what my weaknesses are. And having that vulnerability around knowing that I am not going to be brilliant at everything. And if they understand my weaknesses, they'll be more sympathetic when they don't get the answers they want or they have their frustrations. I think, but my lesson really from leadership is if you've got brilliant people, just let them be brilliant. And we've got some absolute superstars in Soilex, and everyone does their thing their own slight different way. But if you give them that flexibility, if you give them the flexibility of when they turn up to work, when they go home from work, of the way they want to work, the clients they want to work with, I like to create not both a work-life balance, but a work balance in terms of giving them a variety of things and not just saying, right, you're going to do just that one thing and you sit in this silo. Brilliant people always give more back than what you take. And I've learned that we have contracted working hours, but we don't really have working hours. I never check where my people are. And from that, you tend to find that you get way, way more back than...
Really?
Yeah, it's great. I love it. And I'm probably naive enough to think that might always be the case. And if you grow more and more people, then eventually you're going to have your challenges with that. And certainly we've had a couple of, I say bad eggs, people that probably don't have the work ethic that maybe other people do.
Yeah.
But you figure that out pretty quickly. And I guess one of my lessons would be fire faster, because we've got rid of some people that ultimately were, not pulling their weight, and they, maybe give people too much credit to say, give them another month.
Yeah.
And eventually you got to pull the trigger.
I've been in a position myself, think, give it another month. Give it one more. Still not work.
No, if the norm is you've got brilliant people and you've got faith in people, then suddenly not having faith in people is a bit of a challenge. But I think we've just employed a couple of people recently. One of the people's first day was Monday, and they came and met the team. We had a bit of a team half day, and they said the atmosphere is great. Everyone's really engaged, and it hasn't just been me that's fostered that. It's the whole team that's done that. It's, yes, you create an environment where everyone can hopefully enjoy themselves and have fun and do stuff they want to do. But at the same time, if you've got really, really good people, they create that atmosphere. One person can't do it alone. You need a whole team of people that are doing it.
It sounds like you have a really great culture in your company at the moment. So through some of the kind of podcasts or books I've read or listened to in relation to entrepreneurship, it always says that it's kind of good up to about 13, 14, 15 people. And then once you start going much beyond that, then it's quite difficult to keep the kind of same flavor as what was. How have you considered that? What's your plans to deal with that if you have?
No, it's a good question. I think that's one of our concerns. So we're opening a second office, which is 2.5, 3 hours north of where our current office is. And one of my biggest fears is that it's going to become an us and them, a north and south.
Yeah.
That's what they do. Here's what we do.
Yeah.
So there, we've got plans. We have a Monday morning company meeting every week without fail, where everyone knows what's going on. We have business updates. Each department will talk through some of the stuff that's happened in the previous week and some of the stuff that's happening in the next week. So it's keeping them involved and making sure that there's regular meetups and that people are working between offices and all that kind of stuff that we want to try and do. One of the things that we're going to have, obviously, and we're planning to the diary now, we're getting a bigger team and we're more spread out, is just making sure we've got socials booked in. And that's regular, so the whole team can meet up and you can keep that environment. And inevitably it will be a challenge. And I think inevitably the bigger you get and the more people you've got and the more offices you have, then you can't even think that you can keep the same culture you had when you were 3 people. It's just impossible. But I think as long as I can keep a culture where people are happy to come to work, they're not worried about coming to work on a Sunday night, and that they're enjoying themselves, and that they're still living up to what our beliefs are in terms of delivering quality, then I'll be happy.
Sure. So you mentioned earlier on about the marketing. So you engaged at a marketing agency to create videos for Soilex. How did that process go? How did it have an impact on the business and brand visibility, getting customers essentially?
Yeah. So the big learning for me was, and one of the biggest learnings I've had probably in the last 12 months, is setting the company up for success and not failure. And I always used to think, well, I'll get a marketing company in and I'll just manage it. But actually, a marketing company needs constant feedback, someone that's available, someone that's reviewing their stuff, and someone that's, essentially becoming their account manager almost.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that. And to some degree, it didn't fail at all, because what they produced was absolutely fantastic. But it would have been more of a success had I set Soilex up better to work with them, because they were really struggling, I think, to work with us because of the way that I had set it up, in that it was me. I'm still doing all the other stuff that I'm doing. I'm just putting more on my plate, and my natural, I guess some of the things that I'm not particularly good at is being regimented enough to go back to stuff. I'll prioritize, and I think with marketing, you can always not prioritize it, or you can always just do that tomorrow. Whereas you delivering work for clients who need work to be delivered is always our priority.
Yeah.
So the lesson from that was we've now employed a full-time marketing person.
Okay.
So she works 3 days a week for us. So she actually works. So we had 2 people working for her. We had one agency that produced the video stuff. We had one agency who was doing our socials, and there was Sinead, who now came across and worked for us, was working for that agency doing our socials. But what we realised was essentially we were having to write it, because she wasn't in the business every single day.
Yeah.
She didn't understand really what we did. She wasn't down in the nitty gritty of it. And again, when you go back to the stuff we want to post on our socials, we want it to be educational and useful. Now she's in the office 3 days a week. She's going out to sites with our team. She's not done soil sampling, but she's seen soil sampling. She's been on contaminated sites. So she starts to understand it, so she can start to deliver value in the content. So but I think in terms of the ultimate success of our marketing, I think that in our world, people know Soilex. It's not exclusively because of the marketing, but a large part of it is because we're very visible and we're constantly posting and potentially clogging up people's feeds with our stuff. And that's massive. It is massive for us, just in terms of brand awareness, but also the site doesn't have to be a contaminated one for us to work with you. But when a problem hits, people pick up the phone, and often what the first thing they'll say is, "Oh yeah, I've been following your stuff for years. I just wanted to find the right project to work with you on." Little do they know that actually some of the projects they've worked on before, they probably could have worked with us on, but that's absolutely fine. But you need to be at the forefront of people's minds on a regular basis for them to pick up the phone to you. And it's allowed us to grow. LinkedIn genuinely has generated us huge amounts of revenue.
Yeah.
Even this week, I did a post about coal tar, and then 2 people pick up the phone to me and say, "Oh, I've got a coal tar problem. Can you help us with it?"
Yeah.
Suddenly you've then got thousands of tons of coal tar that you're helping people to move because of a LinkedIn post, and they wouldn't have probably picked up the phone or even thought of us, or we jogged their memory to think about it. So yeah, I think the marketing aspect of it is really, really important for us as we try and grow.
It is, yeah. I mean, I use LinkedIn a lot, and it's a way, of awareness for ourselves, and every conversation is easier to have.
Well, you do a podcast, right?
And I do a podcast as well, which I shout about on LinkedIn. But yeah, it definitely makes it easier, and it's amazing how people can forget quite quickly, and you kind of just need to keep reminding people week in, week out.
I've got this idea of creating, 20, 30, 40 sort of educational clips of, what should you do if you find asbestos, what to look out for with contamination, how, all that kind of stuff. There's a big long list of them. And if we can just create those little 30-second clips that people can always refer back to, yes, it's great marketing, but it's delivering value as well.
Yeah. It's a good idea, because you can have it on the website as almost like your library of frequently asked questions, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And it'll get some good eyes on the website as well. So
Yep.
what's one of the most memorable, challenging projects you've worked on, and what did you learn from it?
So we've just finished a project actually down in Bristol where we managed about 10,000 tons of contaminated waste for a client. And ultimately it went well, but it wasn't without its challenges. And I think that lessons we learned from that is, one, make sure you have a contingency in terms of how you're going to manage the waste if the worst happens. And secondly, it's expectation and communication to the client of making sure they're aware of the limitations of your solution. Now, we had a really, really nice solution, and then simple things like the weather goes against you. So, we were going to take this waste and we were going to process it and we were going to reduce volumes and what have you, which was a great idea when we were talking to her about it in June when it was 35 degrees. And we always said we wanted to do the job in the summer. And then suddenly they say, right, we've got instruction. It's September.
Yeah.
And it's near the coast. And we got the job done. We always will get the job done, but it wasn't without its challenges. And I think that we learned a lot from that in terms of building in contingency and making sure that contingency was well communicated to the client. Often they hear what they want to hear. So you sometimes could bang on about it until you blue in the face, but all they're hearing is, I've got a solution. But I think we probably could have done a slightly better job.
Okay, so what advice would you give someone just entering the waste management industry today?
I would say, where possible, a brilliant company to work for, with someone who is going to be a good mentor. I think if you're a company that is doing some simple basic stuff, doing mass volume of it, then there's not probably a huge amount to learn. Whereas if you're a company that is maybe got quite a variety of things that you offer and you've got different people with different skill sets, then that person going into that business is going to get the experience of working with lots and lots of different people and so their knowledge is going to improve. And if that company is quite diverse in what they do, then it creates variety in your life. And I think, if again, you're only as good as the people that you've worked with and worked for. And I was with GRS for 15 years. And I learned a huge amount from lots of brilliant people, both internally and externally, because of the size of the business they were. It set me up. When I first started there, I remember now I was 6 months into the job and genuinely had a conversation with my boss whether it was right for me, probably because I was absolutely useless. But the more you're surrounded by brilliant people, industry leaders,
it rubs off, doesn't it?
It rubs off, and you're party to conversations. Slight controversial topic, but things like working from home. If you're a young person starting in the business and it's a work from home culture, you're going to miss out on 1,000 30-second conversations, a few phone calls, overhearing this, overhearing that. Take our marketing person for instance. She's in the office 3 days a week and she's learned more in those 3 days by being in the office than she learned in 6 months being our marketing person working externally. So I'm not against working from home, but if you're going to start a job where you're going to be almost exclusively working from home, you're just going to learn slower.
Yeah, it's really important, I think, especially at the earlier stages, like you're saying, because we deal with candidates who are just keen to kind of work from home all the time, and pretty much as a first job as well. Can we, kind of be in the office and then sometime at home and basically never be on site, which does work for some companies, but for the majority of our clients, they need you to have the experience, of kind of trying to write a log in the rain and dealing with drillers and all of these things that crop up that you can't really appreciate unless you've kind of been there and done it yourself.
Yeah, you got to get your hands dirty. But that, again, I'm not against it, and I think in certain worlds and certain roles, I think that it'll work, and I think for certain people's life situations, absolutely it can work.
Yeah.
But if I think bringing people into Soilex, then the conversations that we have on a regular basis, between the technical team or between the commercial teams, people overhearing that is gold dust. And you would miss that if you were sitting at home. I remember, again, when I was at GRS, my role became a national one. If I sat in an office, I'd get asked 50 questions. But if I was out of the office, my phone wouldn't ring 50 times.
Yeah.
So people aren't asking the questions. They're making assumptions or they're just not asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it's a much easier thing to ask, then it's much more likely to happen, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So looking back at your early career, is there anything that you wish you had known when you were starting out that would have made a big difference?
No, I mean, no, not really. I think that you go on the journey you go on, don't you? And I think that ultimately I probably spent the first 8 years not working in waste, and had I worked in that quicker, I would be where I am now quicker. But it's all part of the learning curve. So, I think I'm fortunate enough that I stumbled across, purely by accident, something where I think it suits my skill set in terms of problem solving, and it suits me as a person in terms of the industry, and finding that niche where you're in a world where there's not many people that are good at it, which is really, for us as a business, fortunate. But some of that is just luck, and you find your own way. So no, I don't think I would change anything really. I'm sure I've made mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
I make mistakes every single day probably, but it's good for you, right?
Yeah, and some of the big ones can be very useful if you learn from it and you move on. If you don't, then definitely not. But
absolutely,
humans generally learn and move on from them. So, what makes Soilex stand out compared to other waste management companies?
For me, if I am doing a sales pitch on Soilex, I always say that we can cover all the bases, and I hate the term one-stop shop.
I had that written down to say earlier on.
It's one of my least favorite terms because it's so overused. But I think for us, it does resonate, because if you're a waste producer or you've got a site that is producing waste, you don't want to have to go to a consultant for one element or two elements, with the testing, and then you're trying to make that work for the people who are trying to move the waste, and you're trying to get all those parties involved. I think there's very, very few companies, if any, that can go on, that have chartered waste managers, have asbestos operatives within the business, can do testing, write clear and nice and easy reports to understand, but then can facilitate the ultimate management of the waste as well. There's very, very few companies like that. And when I was at GRS, that's kind of what I saw as a niche in the industry, of someone not just purely being a waste broker and just moving waste. And that's all we do. And actually, you provide us information, we'll tell you what we can and can't do with it. It's that full service. And that's what I love about Soilex, is that there's very, very few people that do that. And we do it, I think, very, very well.
So, I mean, in terms of the kind of one-stop shop, if you kind of didn't provide that, then it's just all things that take time and need to be organised and diaries sorted out to have liaison between all three. And so, I mean, it's definitely, of course, a useful thing.
And I know I said it before, but it's that crucial piece of, if you're instructing testing on the waste, you're testing it to move it. That's what you need to do. You need to classify it. You need to do appropriate testing. You're testing it to move it. You're not just testing it. And often we see results that come through that actually hinder the way that waste can be moved for a variety of reasons. Because, if it's a hazardous waste treatment process, what they want to know is, well, can we treat this waste? So they might want to know, certain aspects of how you tested that. I mean, we can't really figure out whether that waste is treatable or not, and that problem. So it's just knowing that all of the steps in the process is really crucial.
Sure. So can you share an example where Soilex made a significant difference for a client, particularly in solving a challenging waste management problem?
Yeah, one that's actually quite recent and so fresh in my mind, and I'm not at liberty to divulge names and what have you, but this major house builder had an issue of some waste that they had processed on site. So number one, they hadn't processed it under any kind of permit, and the Environment Agency landed and said, you haven't processed that under a permit, so therefore it's not met end of waste, and you need to move it off site as a waste. That officer then, in their wisdom, took 3 random samples from that stockpile of processed waste and came back and said, this 3,000 tonne of waste is all hazardous, which suddenly lands this house builder with a bill probably in excess of £250,000 to deal with. So a few things there. One, there was no sampling strategy. 2, the sampling wasn't sufficient for the volume of waste. And we looked at all of that. We looked at the nature of the waste. We looked at the results they came back, and we thought there's not something quite right here. So we developed a strategy. We did a lot more testing than what the regulator had done. We used a statistical approach to assess those results. Our sampling methodology was relevant to the waste as well. So you're factoring things like stone content and asphalt and what have you. And ultimately what we evidenced was that waste wasn't hazardous, as it was non-hazardous. And whilst it still had to move as waste and couldn't be reused because of the way it had been processed, it could be taken to a recycling yard, it could be processed, and it could then be end of waste and be sold as an aggregate. So the cost saving would have been north of £200,000. But the sustainability as well, in terms of how that waste was managed, was also hugely beneficial because it could go straight back into the circular economy. So I think that was a real success for us in terms of delivering for a client, showing how technical competence and the understanding of the legislation, understanding of WM3 can really, really be a benefit. And I think had they not have contacted us and you would have just taken the regulator's word as, okay, this waste is hazardous, it would have cost them a lot of money, but also that waste could have gone to treatment, but it wouldn't have been as easy to recycle and put back into the circular economy. So, I think it was a real win for us. It was a real nice showcase of our expertise.
Alex, that takes us to the end of the podcast. Thanks for your time today. Do you have anything to add, or where can people get in touch with yourself?
No, really enjoyed being and chatting through. It's good to be able to rant in person rather than just rant via LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But no, contact us. Obviously, our contact details are either via our website, which is soilex.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn and message me privately, and I'm happy to chat confidentially if people don't necessarily want to speak about their waste management woes in
That's fine. I will put a link in the show notes to the website and to your LinkedIn profile as well. But thanks very much for your time today, Alex. And I'm sure a lot of people will gain some good value for it. So thank you very much.
I loved it. Cheers, Michael. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ground Investigation Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please support the show by leaving it a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. For more information on what was discussed in this episode, click the link in the show notes now.